All right, let's get into this real quick. Basically, there's something going on. And one of the things you need to know is that I now know how to use little buttons with my show. So it's going to be very, very, very awesome. But also, we're going to go into Trump's new plans, allegedly. Allegedly. We don't know. We don't know if this is actual truth. This was reported to a news station. Here's their article. Basically, it was done today. Okay. So we don't know if this is de facto true, but it does have the scent of a very Trumpy style of a Social Security Administration. Let's read through the basics real quick, and then I'll explain how it works so you guys are on board and know exactly what to expect from it. Trump's plan would limit disability benefits for older Americans. Trump administration officials are considering eliminating age as a factor in deciding whether someone is capable of working. The Social Security Administration headquarters, basically, as you know, in Woodlawn, Maryland, is allegedly considering with Trump the potential of getting rid of the grid rules. Let's read through the article. It's by Lisa Rain. Okay, and let's see. So that was the photo thing. The Trump administration is preparing a plan that will make it harder for older Americans to qualify for Social Security disability payments, part of an overhaul of the federal safety net for the poor, old, and disabled people that could result in hundreds of thousands of people losing benefits, according to people familiar with the plans. Currently, the Social Security Administration evaluates disability claims by considering age, work experience, and education to determine if a person can adjust to other types of work. Older applicants, typically over 50, have a better chance of qualifying because age is treated as a limitation in adapting to many jobs. So, just to put it simply, if you're over 50, if you're over 55, if you're over 60, it gets easier and easier to be found disabled. Now, the reason the SSA traditionally likes this rule is because it favors finding people disabled that are in the older categories, which means they have to pay them less money over basically a period of time. So imagine if you have somebody young and you got to pay them their entire life, that's a lot of monthly checks adding up. But if you have somebody old and you only have to pay them for this period of monthly checks, well, that's a good deal. That's a good deal for the SSA because they don't have to pay for that younger person for such a long period of time. So the practical application version of this system was basically how Trump was considering getting rid of this, but that actually would not align completely with, I think, what his agenda or people realize it actually would. Let me explain why. If you get rid of the age preference rule, which are these grid rules, then basically anybody on the spectrum could potentially be eligible. And what that means is that the federal government is very excited about not having to pay younger people for a very, very long period of time. In fact, they release this data to the different judges and DDS groups, et cetera, on how much it actually costs to pay a person who's younger. So if you get a 30-year-old and they're getting a check after a check after a check, month after month, that's going to add up by the time they pass away when they're 80 something. So I don't think Trump has thought that particular item through completely. I think what he's focused on, which is not the whole story, it's a very tiny part of it, is that he is focused on the grid rules potentially being removed, and then it would be harder for everybody to be found disabled. Now, an interesting stat, around 20% of individuals applying for disability benefits under the Social Security umbrella right now are getting denied, like 20% more than they normally would. That's how they're actually speeding up the process of getting rid of the massive backlog. It's by hyper denying people at the initial filing and reconsideration levels. So with Trump's presidency, we might actually see some variation from the norms of how many people get approved and how many people get denied. One thing I always present to people about this situation is that when you go in front of a disability judge, right, they tend to have so many hearings in a day, and they tend to mathematically approve so many of those hearings, usually 2, sometimes 3 in a particular day. So I ask the person, what evidence do you have that makes you believe, this is before I take them on as a client, what evidence do you have that you believe the judge, out of those 5 people showing up before them that day, what evidence do you have that makes you somebody that the judge will pick to be found disabled? And, you know, a lot of people be like, oh, well, it's because I feel this. Subjective evidence not worth much. Oh, it's because I told my master's level therapist this. Not very objective, not going to hold a lot of weight. So you have to understand that at the end of the day, if they remove these grid rules, like potentially it's a rumor that Trump is suggesting, which it does feel like a very Trump oriented maneuver, then this would go ahead and create more of a open playing field for the younger people to compete against the older people, because the older people no longer have the automatic advantage with the grid rules. But again, I don't think Trump would do this. I think Trump would probably modify the age rules for grid outs. And so people who were found basically normally at the grid rule for the 50-year-old category, it might be pushed up to 55 and then basically 60 and maybe 62. They might push the math upwards for basically who could go through. Now, some of you are thinking real quick, hey, wait a minute. Does this mean it's going to be hard for me to keep my benefits? Well, no, and a little yes. No, because they have to use the same legal standard, while they were adjudicating you to go ahead and re-adjudicate you in the future using the 8-step sequential process, right? So if you're getting found disabled in your kid claim, 3-step sequential process. If you're getting found disabled in your adult claim, 5-step sequential process, the 5 elements, right? If you're getting reviewed to see if you're still disabled, that's the 8-step sequential process. That's where there's 8 elements to decide if you're still disabled. Now, when you guys go through a CDR, just to be very clear, the 8-step sequential process, right, is going to be using the old schematics and old rules of when you were found disabled. But if the culture of the SSA changes enough, then the adjudicators, the DDS reps, the ALJs, could be so aggressive at denying claims that it denies your claim, and after multiple appeals, you still can't win it. You might have to file again. And in that instance, then you would not have the potential grid rules to use in your favor. Let's keep reading. All right, so here we go. Currently, the Social Security Administration evaluates disability claims based on age, work experience, education, and what the person can do when adjusting to other types of work. But now officials are considering eliminating age as a factor entirely, right? So they're getting rid of the grid rules entirely, or raising the threshold to age 60. According to 3 people familiar with the plans who spoke on the condition of anonymity to share private discussions. So if they, instead of having it as people, and this is, let me tell you something, if Trump did this, there would be a massive riot from people who are impaired. Let me explain why. At 50 years old, right, the grid rules look at, okay, can they do like the light, sedentary, medium, heavy, very heavy work, right? Then it becomes a little bit easier to be found disabled at 50. It's at 5-year age groups, right? But here's the deal. At 50, right, you still have time on the clock when it comes to, living your life, yada, 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 right? You get closer to 60 plus, then you're getting closer to retirement. You're going to transition over to retirement at 67 if you're SSDI. If you're SSI, 62 if it's available. So the point is, if they raise the age to 60 from a legal perspective, that means that, you could only have a total of 7 years of sitting on SSDI until they automatically transfer you over to retirement. Or if you're SSI, then they basically would go ahead and approve you, and then 2 years later, force you onto retirement benefits. So that whole grouping of time in which case you would be sitting on disability benefits would be completely eroded away, which would not be good for claimants. It would be a restriction to the types of benefits they could actually receive. Now, let's go through this real quick. All right. So as a result, they're looking at a potential threshold of age 60 or eliminating them in total. They also plan to modernize labor market data used to judge whether claimants can work, replacing an outdated jobs database that includes obsolete occupations like nut sorters and telephone quotation clerks, following a Washington Post investigation in 2022. All right, let me explain what happened with that, because a lot of people don't know about that whole schmutz. All right, so they had a system that they used to decide if somebody could work. The system was a big old book of jobs. It was a big old book of jobs, like lots of jobs. So many jobs you wouldn't believe how far the eye could see in jobs, right? They got nut sorter, or they've got basically a cashier, or they got a construction worker, all kinds of jobs, all kinds. They got doctors, judges, all kinds of jobs. They basically were working on, and the last thing I saw was it was closer to half a billion dollars were spent. Close to $500 million were spent on creating a new book of all the potential jobs that were out there, right? And what happened with the whole thing, and it was quite a scene, was that basically the commissioners came in and they said, look, they have had years upon years upon years to finish this new book of jobs that we can use to judge whether or not you should keep your benefits because of potential jobs that you could work. Well, what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to say, hey, you know what? We may not use that thing you've been working on, but they don't want to use the Dictionary of Occupational Titles because that hasn't been updated in decades. So a lot of the newer jobs sitting on, your computer at home aren't in that. So the bottom line is they want to come out with a book that has a bunch of really easy, simple, at-home sedentary jobs so that pretty much anybody falling into the categories where they could potentially stand or walk or do whatever and still have enough concentration, they're going to be not found disabled because they're just looking for people who can barely sit, who can barely focus. And, what we're talking about, from a mental standpoint, people who have to go inpatient, right? If we're talking from a physical standpoint, people who every 3 to 4 months potentially are inside the emergency room or getting a lot of physical treatment, medication swap outs, things like that, because they're truly unable to do the basics of even a sedentary job, right? They'd have difficulty with sitting, walking, standing, pushing, pulling, crouching, kneeling, stooping, blah, 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 all that stuff. So this is going to change a lot. This is going to change a massive amount of how people are found disabled for Social Security benefits, and then ultimately how that affects retirement down the line. So this is huge. This is a very, very new, very big thing. Real quick, Jody Osborne. Thank you for the $4.99 donation. Absolutely love it. Very, very cool. Let me put a little heart there. That's awesome. She said, thank you as always, Walter. And I super appreciate that. That's awesome. So let me kind of walk you through this real quick. If they were to get rid of essentially the grid outs, then ultimately what you would find is that there would be an erosion of people being found disabled. The amount of people being found disabled would go down over time. Now, this sounds like a very Trump-oriented thing. Like, this sounds like a very, it sounds in line with, the things that they were doing with Commissioner Saul in the first term that President Trump was in. Here's my thing. President Trump released an executive order to try and get away from, essentially, housing people first. Instead, he would rather focus on institutionalizing people first and then housing them. What concerns me about this, and you guys know I'm an independent, I'll tell you the crap of the left, I'll tell you the crap of the right. You figure you get to join whatever side you want. You can join the unicorns or you can join the magical Pegasus team. I don't care. Whatever you want to join. The point is this. If Trump pushes the identity of having a lot of these people who can't work forced into institutions, and then if they play along and have progress going from institutions into housing, then who's going to pay for them to exist and live if they're unable to work? And you make it so that disability benefits are so tough to get that bottom line is most people can't get them. See, the problem is it's a fail problem. He will fail if he makes it so that people will go into an institution but not be able to successfully use it to obtain disability benefits under the grid rules. So let me put it to you another way. Here, I'll read a little bit more and then we'll go back into it. All right. Jack Smulligan, senior policy fellow at the Urban Institute and a former Office of Management and Budget official through 5 administrations, wrote in a recent paper that if the proposed rule reduced eligibility for the disability program by 10%, right? So they're reducing the amount of people who could become eligible and win disability benefits by 10%. That means 750,000 fewer people would receive benefits for all or part of the next decade. So there's a little less than 1 million people would no longer, over the next 10 years, become capable of receiving Social Security disability benefits. So what that means is, just to kind of clarify for you, a lot of you will have to do whatever you can do to protect and keep your benefits. I'm talking about getting your RFCs completed, your residual functional capacity forms, getting your vocational opinion letters completed about how you are work preclusive. You can't do work. I'm talking about having evidence that's repetitive, having crisis medical treatment evidence that shows even when you are on track, you're not fully stabilized. This is going to become crucial in the future. And I don't think a lot of you guys realize, and you may have, some of you have. I will hand it to some of you. But the bottom line is this: you go back 20 years, everybody expected to have their benefits for the rest of their life. That was the gig. That was the spiel. That's how it was. And then they ramped up OIG, CDI units to investigate people. They started watching people more, taking more videos of people. They started doing more reviews more often. They put everybody on a hyper organized calendar as to when they should have their reviews to see if they're still disabled. And now what's happened is people don't believe they'll have their benefits for the rest of their life. It's a totally different schematic than it ever was before. And it's happening really fast. I didn't think it was going to happen this fast. I didn't. So if you're ever wondering like where I got it wrong, I did not expect it to happen this fast. All right, let me keep reading. In addition, 80,000 fewer widows and children would receive benefits due to the loss in eligibility of a spouse or the parent. Okay, that would lead to $82 billion less paid out in benefits over 10 years. Small estimated. So just to be clear, if they were to change this rule and make it much harder for people to be found disabled, around $82 billion less of benefits paid out would actually occur. So what they're saying is, this is how you essentially create, this would be a war against disability benefits. This would be a dark strike against Social Security benefits. And it doesn't just affect, like as we're reading right now, it doesn't just affect disability, because when somebody becomes disabled, their kids can get auxiliary benefits, right? Their spouses can get some benefits sometimes, and then it affects their trajectory path to retirement as well. So across the spectrum, this would probably be the biggest law change that we've seen in a very, very long time. I mean, the mega law change was when they changed under Martin O'Malley, which was a smart move, moving it from 15 years of vocational review down to just 5 years, right? To see, because, who the hell knows what they were doing 15 years ago with their work, like knowing exactly what they did at their job. And nobody, 15 years ago, that's a long time. All right. Let's keep reading. Smolligan said research has shown that a majority of older Americans who apply for disability benefits don't get another job. If the rule didn't consider age as a factor, more older disabled workers would probably start taking early retirement benefits, significantly reducing their monthly benefit amount, which, to be fair, is in line with them trying to have the trust funds, because let's keep in mind, the government has a couple of problems with retirement. First, people live too long, or put another way, people don't pass away early enough. And then two, how much benefits are being paid to them? Well, they don't have a lot of money left, because a lot of money they put into special interest bonds that the government would then spend on stuff that they wanted to, and then they'd pay them back with interest after a 15-year period. But you guessed it, that interest didn't cover what it was supposed to. So if you go by the rules of the way it works, the government gave themselves a sweetheart deal to take out money away from the Social Security trust funds that was then used to be converted into special interest bonds to go ahead and basically spend it on stuff that they wanted, so long as they paid it back within 15 years in interest. But of course, the interest that they paid it back with was part of their sweetheart deal. All right, here we go. So they make a point here. Older workers who claim retirement benefits, let's go back. Older disabled workers would probably start taking early retirement benefits. So expect 62, right? A lot of these people that can't get disability benefits are going to take their benefits for retirement at 62, because if they can't get SSDI, they can't ride it to 67, right? The other thing too, they have to keep in mind is that when you take SSDI early, a lot of those months that would normally get checked as zeros aren't going to be calculated the same way. So that's going to mess up your retirement benefits as well if they pass this. Another thing to keep in mind is that they make a small point here. Okay. If the rule didn't consider age as a factor, okay. Oh, no. Here it is. Has shown that a majority of older Americans who apply for disability benefits don't get another job. Now, here's the thing. That's true. When somebody goes on disability benefits, a lot of them, they're just kind of in this land where they don't think they're going to have to work another job in the future. That's just not on the platform for a future where they're going to have to go ahead and like get some job and go work at McDonald's and blah, blah. Because remember, when these people used to have a career and then you return back to them in 15 years and say, well, you're no longer disabled, you're no longer this bad. When that happens, when that situation occurs, that person is now in ultimate crisis anxiety mode. And it's unfortunate because now you're taking a person who had some form of expectation that they would have this benefit for the rest of their life and now is not going to be able to, and they have to go and work and they have to be able to afford the apartment that they're in and find a way to get their food and find a way to get new clothing and things like that. Now, under the VA rules, like a veteran that's disabled, they have a rule where your benefits are somewhat protected from reductions. There's a 5-year rule, a 10-year rule, and a 20-year rule. And the goal is to hit 20 years because then they can't bump you down, right? So the bottom line here is Social Security recipients, the Civilian Disability Benefit Program for SSDI, they don't have a protection like that. They don't have a magical 10-year rule, 20-year rule, stuff like that. So there's nothing protecting those people in the future, which is, again, my point, and I want to make this, and I think it's incredibly important. Please remember, when you have a disability benefit, when you receive disability benefits or a spousal benefit or a, ex-spousal benefit or a, whatever, any one of these different types of benefits with the SSA, your job is to upkeep those benefits. The days of old where you could just not go to the doctor, where you could just not get medical treatment, where you could just ignore the medications, where you could just basically slide through life and constantly go on vacations and cruises, those days are over. They were over in the beginning of them before Trump. In the second term, they really started to end in the last presidency, where we saw a lot of this stuff really shift, especially with what was being produced from OIG and the CDI units. And to be fair, that was all throttled up by the first Trump presidency. Just to be fair, although it took more effort in place and shaping during the Biden era. Now, with that said, keeping all of this in mind, I think a really strong point is being made here. And the point that's being made here is, should we expect disabled people who haven't been working for a while, who might have gotten better? Because let's just call it like it is. When you're not forced to wake up consistently, go do a job, keep pushing, go do more work extra hours, yada, yada. When you have that situation, you don't, and you stop working and you're on disability benefits, you don't have an expectation going into the future that you're going to have to go back to that. Well, under these new rules and regulations, it would likely go ahead and create a more aggressive denial culture. They still have to follow the old rules of how you were found disabled, but the denial culture would greatly increase. And we've already seen that. We've already seen the statistics now with about a 20% increase in denials at the initial filing and reconsideration levels. These are levels we have not seen, I think, ever in my practicing time, which is a long time. So as a result, the culture of denying people who need disability benefits, who are trying to get disability benefits, is skyrocketing upwards. Okay. So that's important to kind of keep in mind. Now, please remember, if you enjoy me going through these, details, what's up, what's happening, what's new, what's breaking, please remember to like and subscribe because it helps other people see these videos. Also, don't forget to hype the video. Let's get into it real quick. All right. So SSA spokesman Barton Mackey said the agency is working on plans to propose improvements to the disability adjudication process to ensure our disability program remains current and can be more efficiently administered. This includes, quote, proposing policy updates to occupational data sources and optimizing their use to serve our customers and preserve the trust funds. Mackey said, once the proposal is fully developed, we will share it publicly and request public comment through the standard rulemaking process. As with any rulemaking, we will consider and analyze public comments before deciding whether to finalize the rule. All right, so let's just be fair here. And I'm going to skip the jazz with it. What the SSA is trying to do is get rid of the dictionary of occupational titles and use some other form of a book that's already in existence that's standard updated as to what jobs exist. And then they're going to use those jobs, which are simpler, easier to do. They allow a lot of computer work from home to go ahead and deny people when they're applying for benefits. Also, they're going to be looking to use this book in the future to define essentially what the new disabled person will sound like, look like, the diagnostic impressions that they have, the limitations that they have, etc. You will be seeing. Now, look, you go back in time, you go back 20 years, you had a bunch of individuals that got on disability benefits because they sneezed the wrong way, or they did it, or they did, it was very easy to get onto benefits way back in the day, 20 years ago, even 15 years ago. It was much, much easier to get on disability benefits. However, as you have noticed, people getting on nowadays are much, much more severe. Whereas a lot of the people that are, they're okay, they're moderate, they're moderate. There's no way. There's absolutely no way that they get on nowadays. The amount of liberal judges that are very liberal with approvals, most of them at this point have either passed away or are retired. They're just not in the game of approving people like they used to for benefits. Let's keep reading. Okay. People familiar with the proposal changes said they are a priority of Russell Vought, director of the Office of Management and Budget, who sought during Trump's first term to update the disability rules through executive action. At the start of Trump's second term, the White House Budget Office urged former acting commissioner Leland Dudek to pursue rule changes shortly after he took office. Remember, Leland Dudek was the commissioner that was put in place to do the hard Doge pushes, right? Commissioner Dudek was in when Doge was full fire, full force looking into the SSA. And he did do a lot of changes, and they did find a lot of stuff. And, he even said that commissioner, he's probably never going to get a job after that job, which is why with commissioners of the SSA, like many of those top positions, there's a pension that goes with it because, you might not be loved at the end of the day. Next one. Conservatives have long argued that since Americans are living longer and fewer have jobs that require manual labor, many physically disabled workers could adapt to desk work, broadening their work options and resulting in fewer people being granted disability benefits. Social Security officials prepared to issue a similar rule at the end of the first Trump administration, but ran out of time. Okay. Quote, "We felt that so many more jobs are now available to disabled people," said Mark Warshansky, who led work on the earlier proposed rule as the SSA's deputy commissioner for retirement and disability policy during the first Trump administration. "The nature of work has changed," end quote. So in other words, what the Republican side is saying is they're saying they would rather people not go on to disability benefits if they could work an at-home computer job. Now, they're also arguing that the amount of people needed for blue-collar labor is smaller. I would completely disagree with that. I think the amount of blue-collar laborers that are out there has significantly increased because there's a lot more people out there, A, and because there's more people, we need more people to build stuff. Somebody's got to put the electrical lines in. Somebody's got to put the water lines in. Somebody's got to build you a shower, build you a kitchen. Somebody's got to build you a roof. So, there's more of them out there doing more of this stuff. There's a lot of construction-oriented labor. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But those people do have bodies that get worn out. Look, some of you guys think you had a really tough job. And I fully understand it, and I appreciate, where you're at with what you think might be essentially a tough job, right? I fully get it. But was your job working in the hot, hot sun on top of a roof, doing a roof job where your boots were melting to the tar paper? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. You let me know in the comments. I am curious. Maybe your job was having to go lay tile in commercial buildings before they had AC, and you had to basically carry in all these boxes of tile and then lay them out, put them down, and get them rolling. Did you enjoy that job yourself? You let me know in the comments. Maybe you were an individual who basically had a cushy machine-oriented heavy machinery job for the blue-collar side that was maybe a front loader, maybe an excavator. Maybe. But my point is, with these blue-collar workers, their bodies get worn out before a lot of these other people. Their bodies aren't worn out by the time they're 60. They're way worn out by that point. The bodies are worn out by the time they hit their 40s into their 50s. That's where they're unable to do stuff because their joints, their wrists, their elbows, their knees, their hips, they wear out. And then we got to get them surgery, but we can't get them surgery because they don't have Medicare, because we don't have a Medicare system for all these different workers. Isn't that weird? Do you ever sit back and think about that? We do have the marketplace, but the marketplace can be very, very expensive. Isn't it kind of odd that if America needs more workers to pay more taxes so that they can borrow more money against their work product for future things and projects that they want to do, spending the money in the country and outside of the country, isn't it weird that the number one thing that makes America roar is its working class? Mostly it's middle class, right? Isn't it weird that we don't have a system that gives free healthcare to all of our, not free, but you work and it's part of a bigger social net system, and it's like a Medicare for all the workers or all the this or the that. Isn't it weird that we don't have protections like that for the only thing that keeps America rolling? It's just weird. Again, I'm not trying to pull a Bernie here, but did you ever think about that? The working class, the people making the money, the people doing the jobs, we don't have a standardized insurance for them. Right? You got a marketplace in it. It's weird. All right. Paul Harrison, thank you for the $10 donation. Let me see what you put here. He said, what must people do who are currently on SSDI do to keep their benefits? Oh, what must people do? Well, okay. So Paul, let me give you a background on that. You have to figure out what your top 5 impairments are. You have to get a specialist for each of those. You have to get residual functional capacity forms filled out by each one of those specialists. You have to go get a vocational expert that can give you an opinion letter as to why you are disabled and unable to work through the vocational aspect, work preclusive. If you guys want to know like which, vocational experts are potentially out there, you can always reach out to me. If you want an example residual functional capacity letter, you can always reach out to me by email. With that said, the whole point of this thing is that you have to upkeep your benefits. I'll do a whole video walking you through the details of it, but let's keep reading. All right, so here we go. Okay, All right, so Social Security officials prepared to issue similar changes to disability benefits at the end of the first Trump administration, but ran out of time. Warshawski, the senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank, predicted that while the new rule under consideration would allow the agency to turn away more older people, more people with mental disabilities are likely to be approved. I don't know if I agree with that. In fact, I would heavily disagree with that. And here's why. If they created a bunch of institutions and you have more people going into the institutions, then the standard of expectation for how severe somebody is would change, because you'd have more people going into these institutions and you'd probably get more mild to moderate categorizations. Because when you increase the amount of people going to a medical facility, the bright line thought pattern of something that's really severe, right, changes to, somebody that's really, really severe. Because, when you have lots of people constantly coming in, the expectation of what's really, really severe gets warped by those professionals' heads. So as a result of that, I don't think, to be fair, more mental disabilities would be approved, because I feel like more people would be entered into those programs and they'd get marked down with anxiety, depression, panic attacks, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, PTSD, bipolar, multiple personality disorder. I think that they would get presented with those particular items. So, but I don't think they would be in the severe category. Most of them would be in the mild or moderate category. I think that's what would happen. Okay, quote, here we go. Oh, no, here we go. Senate Finance Committee ranking Democrat Ron Wyden argued, Oregon, that the rule change is just the first step in broader Republican plans to cut Social Security. He's not wrong. It would be a massive cut to Social Security benefits in the disability field. And that's for SSI disability and SSDI disability. Quote, this is phase 1 of the Republican campaign to force Americans to work into old age to access their earned Social Security benefits, and represents the largest cut to disability insurance in American history, Wyden said in a statement to the Post. Americans with disabilities have worked and paid into Social Security just like everybody else. and they do not deserve the indignity of more bureaucratic water torture to get what they paid for. Here's the thing. I am not uncertain. I'm not totally certain. I guess here's what I would say. At the end of the day, I believe that people will lose faith in trying to obtain Social Security disability benefits because it will be that hard. It will be that ridiculously difficult to get them. And I do believe more people will be buying short-term disability insurance programs going into the future because they're going to need something to carry them in case something happens to them. So I think people are going to be spending more time purchasing short-term disability insurance programs and long-term disability insurance programs that allow them to stay on their LTD benefits for a very long period of time. And here's my reasoning as to why. My reasoning is that when Americans start to realize that they're paying into this Social Security program that they almost certainly will not be able to get access to because they keep restricting it and changing it and making it much more difficult, then realistically, they will not put faith into the continuation of it. And the first step to that is they'll say, I know I won't be able to get it like I should, so I'll buy into these private industry programs. And then the next thing they'll say is they don't want to pay for disability benefits because it's too hard to get on them to be able to survive. That's what they're saying here. All right. So here we go. The $11 billion monthly disability program is separate from Social Security's retirement system, the SSDI benefits. It is also far more difficult to qualify for benefits under the program than the disability system for veterans. Yeah, so basically getting SSDI benefits used to be easier than getting VA benefits. But VA benefits now are much easier to get than SSDI benefits. And it's been that way for quite a little bit of a while now. And so, when a lot of veterans come to me and I hire, they hire me to go ahead and work on their claim, and I build up their claim, they're like, why do I have to do all this extra work? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to go see this person? Why do I have to go see that person? It's because it's much harder to get on Social Security disability benefits on the civilian program than it is to go on the VA disability compensation program. A lot of veterans, they're in a situation where they're looking at this thing going, hey, wait a minute. I just got my TDIU. I just got my PNT. Why can't I get my SSDI right off the bat? Hey, what the hell? It's because it's much harder now to get essentially your SSDI benefits than your VA benefits. Okay. Next thing. The administration faces a challenge finding ways to keep the retirement fund going as it approaches insolvency. Commissioner Frank Bisignano said the agency is not considering raising the age that retirees qualify for benefits, walking back an earlier comment that the administration had not ruled it out. Okay, here we go. Quote, this includes proposing policy updates to occupational data sources and optimizing their use to serve our customers and preserve the trust funds, Mackey said. Once the proposal is fully developed, we will share it publicly and request public comment through the standard rulemaking process. As with any rulemaking, we will consider and analyze public comments before deciding whether to finalize the rules that we want to present in the future. All right, so next thing. Qualifying for disability benefits, as you know, is a multi-step process. As you know, I'm America's most viewed, clicked on, subscribed to disability attorney. So if you want to get representation, you can always give me a call during the 9 to 5. Let's read through this real quick. So the process can take many, many years, particularly if someone is turned down in appeals. One of the first steps in the process is determining if the applicant has a serious illness or condition on a list of impairments such as ALS, terminal cancer, or chronic heart failure. And that's true. There's 5 elements to disability for obtaining them. Element number 1, okay, you can't be making too much money. You can't be working too good of a job. Number 2, your impairment has to have lasted 12 months or be terminal. Number 3, you either have as bad as or worse than a listed impairment, right? A specific listed impairment. And if you do, you can be found disabled at element 3. That's a step 3 approval. Then you go to, can you work your past jobs? If you can't, can you work other types of jobs? If you can't, you're given a vocational approval. This vocational approval, that's a good deal. You get a benefit check. But remember, if they change the book that they pull the jobs from, they create a whole bunch of new jobs that are super simple for you to do, that ain't good. That ain't good for you. It's not. If their condition is not dire, the applicant's age, work experience, and education becomes factors the government must weigh to decide if the disability still allows them to work. If they are over 50, they have a better shot at qualifying for benefits because they are considered less able to adapt to new work. These factors have been responsible for making about 42% of applicants eligible for benefits, Social Security data from 2022 shows. And let me explain why. Attorneys mostly want claims that are likely to be approved if they work on them. So attorneys mostly take claims that have a higher likelihood of approval based off of things that they know will work to improve and get them to pass through. So attorneys mostly take people, as you know, who are over 50 to allow them the best shot of winning the claim. Because if attorneys took really difficult, impossible claims all the time, they would lose money and go out of business, because attorneys don't get paid in disability law up front. We get paid once we win the benefits. So we don't want to take on claims that are mission impossible. All right, now you know that. To determine the jobs a disability applicant might be able to do, the agency has long relied on a database compiled by the Department of Labor, which abandoned the list more than 30 years ago as the economy shifted away from blue-collar work to information and services. With the aim of modernizing the jobs data it uses, Social Security has paid the Bureau of Labor Statistics more than $300 million to build a complex directory of 21st century jobs. Remember, I was talking about that whole big job list, that whole big job book that failed. They got rid of it. They didn't continue with it. It was expensive. They spent way too much money trying to make it, and they never actually had a prototype capable of being used. All right, so let's keep reading. The spending to build a complex directory for the 21st century came into question. The spending came under scrutiny from lawmakers on Capitol Hill following the earlier Post report. As of today, the agency is still not using the modern data when reviewing disability claims. They use a mixture as of literally weeks ago. This is new. They use a mixture. Technically it was months ago. But, in practical application, it's mostly weeks ago that they've gotten better at, how they phrase things in the hearings. But months ago, they switched over to, yes, you can use the DOT, and we still believe it's a great book, but you can use other sources as well as they transition away from it. Remember, I made a video on this before anybody was even thinking about it. And that video got hardly any views, which is funny because the videos where I prophesize and explain to you what's likely to come, those videos aren't super popular, but they consistently have been pretty darn good at telling you what's coming. All right, so here's the deal. All right, so bottom line, according to two former officials, starting next year, the agency plans to develop a computer-generated database using the modern jobs data to determine which jobs, if any, someone seeking benefits could perform. Disability advocates say they worry that the database will be programmed to come up with a vast array of jobs, particularly if advancing age is no longer a limiting factor and will end up denying benefits to tens of thousands of claimants each year. I would agree. That's probably something that's coming on the horizon. I would agree that's very likely something coming on the horizon. And remember, this is not going to be something that makes Trump look good. This is going to be something that makes a lot of disabled people very pissed at Trump. Michelle Spandiford comes in and basically talks about some additional... but we're going to skip that. We don't need that right now. So here's the kicker, all right? At the end of the day, what we have to look for with this situation is a problem where they are changing the book of jobs that are traditionally used to figure out if somebody is essentially disabled or not. And at the end of the day, just to be clear, right, if they change the jobs to make them super ultra easy jobs, then a lot of people are not going to be found disabled. And it's going to change the culture of disability benefits. And a lot of people who already have them are probably, to be very fair, going to face some difficult times in their CDR reviews upcoming. It's not good. It's not a good situation. All right. It's not going to be okay. I'm just letting you know it's not going to be okay. All right. Let's keep rocking and rolling through this. Quote. All right. You wouldn't stop working because you reach a certain age and you think disability benefit. Okay. So here we go. So these are quote. Okay. More than 15 million Americans receive monthly disability checks as part of two programs. Social Security disability insurance for those who, with a work history, have become disabled before retirement, and Supplemental Security Income, an anti-poverty program for poor elderly and disabled people that pays out essentially $967-ish a month. At the same time, Social Security is working on plans to rescind a Biden-era rule that expanded SSI eligibility for recipients who live with relatives or roommates receiving help from supplemental nutrition assistance program or other public assistance, restoring a stricter standard that could roll back payments for about 400,000 Americans, according to an August report from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. If Trump does that, he will have created an army of people who will be very unhappy with him. What that rule was, just so you guys know, they realized that when they pay out SSI benefits, that everything was so expensive from Biden era. I mean, you can blame Biden, you can blame COVID, whatever. Yeah, I don't care. Everything's too expensive. So they realized that, look, we're paying out SSI benefits, but SSI benefits in and of themselves really aren't enough. And if we reduce them by 1/3 down to $600 something, because that's what they were doing. If somebody was living in the household of somebody else that was providing them some food or shelter or stuff like that, they were taking away 1/3 of their benefits. So they said, look, if we do this, that's not good. That's a real bad no-no situation, because now we have people that can't even afford the basics to be able to survive. So they said under the Biden administration, all right, look, we're going to get rid of some of our rules that would reduce your SSI check by 1/3. And that's what they did. They got rid of it. So then basically the SSI people got more towards the $967. But it appears that they are looking at potentially rescinding that, which will affect essentially 400,000 Americans, creating voters and pissed off future voters one by one, except this will be at $400,000, 400,000 people, Americans a pop. Spataford said she expects her clients impacted by this change could see their payments reduced by 1/3 and others cuts to SNAP as part of Trump's sweeping tax and spending plan could further devastate households. Quote, any small cut in that delicate balance can be the difference between paying your utilities that month, Spataford said. The SSA spokesman said the change would, quote, return us to longstanding criteria and policies to promote program integrity. Quote again, as is standard with rulemaking processes, the proposed rule will be made publicly available and the public will be given an opportunity to comment before the rule is finalized, Mackey said. They keep saying that because they know they're going to have an army of people pissed that they're going to try and change this stuff. So what does this really mean? If they change the whole book situation of jobs that they pull from, that means that you are going to have to find money to hire a vocational expert to create a document that says very likely after the analysis, and remember, they're neutral. They're going to have to be neutral and look at everything you've provided and then figure out whether or not there is a job out there for you to do. If there's not a job out there for you to do, you'll be looking for an opinion letter for work preclusive work status, which means you can't do any jobs in the national economy. And that's going to be tricky because those vocational experts are going to have to be experts on multiple books, the original Dictionary of Occupational Titles, some of the new ones that the federal gov is using right now, and this new modernized system that they're trying to release. So that's going to be a little bit spicy. That's going to be a little bit tricky, in my opinion. That's going to be something. I don't know if they're going to actually do this stuff. Because remember, Trump rattles the cage, right? And then, people get, and then all of a sudden they pull it back. Remember when they were like, yeah, we're going to raise retirement age to like 69-ish, 70-ish. Everybody was like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You try that, not going to happen. That might happen with this as well. But the thing is, most Americans don't know how this works. And maybe I should do an update. I'll do an updated video on how grid outs work and why they're so important. Please remember to click that like button. Please don't be afraid to subscribe, and please don't be afraid to hype this video. Final thoughts on this. I want to know what your final thoughts are. Please let me know in the comment section, in the chat section, whether or not you feel that the Trump administration should change basically two main rules. Rule number one is by using a different book of jobs where there's a lot of jobs that are at-home work on the computer, where they'll say, hey, we don't think you're disabled because we think you could sit and basically work at a computer for 8 hours a day. You know what I mean? That's a big thing. The other option here, right, talking about essentially getting rid of the grid rules, I don't think they will do that. I think they'll try to modify them, but I think everybody in the industry will hate it. Their argument will be that people are living longer, and therefore, because they're living longer, their bodies are living, I guess, with more capacity to work further into the future. I don't know how true that is. I know people are living longer, but I'm not sure their bodies somehow magically are doing better after doing work all this time. Like, think about that as just as an argument for a moment. Just conceptualize with me the following. Let's say somebody would normally live from 0 days old to 60 years old, and they worked for, let's say, 35 years doing, I don't know, let's just say an electrician job, right? Okay, so 35 years, they only live to 60, boom, then they pass. Okay, then let's take somebody who's born and then lives to 85, and for 35 to 40 years, somewhere around that, right? They work as an electrician. Is their body to likely be less beat up if their body has the capacity to live longer? I don't think so. It's the same wear and tear. It's the same wear and tear over a similar period, 35 to 40 years, right? It's the same wear and tear. So, why would we get rid, it's their body's going to be beat up. Doesn't matter if they live to 80, doesn't matter if they live to 90, they still can't do that physical labor job. All right, so I see some flaws. Okay, with this entire situation. I am not approving of their message when it comes to what the Trump administration wants to do with this. We're going to see how they wiggle it, what they want to come out with, what they want to do. But this is very drastically going to affect the outcome of Social Security benefits in the future. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I really don't. But it is something that if it does happen, it is going to directly affect people applying and indirectly affect those who already have benefits. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's very important. Yeah. Liberty 1776 makes a great point. What if somebody is living from 0 to 60, or they live from 0 to 80, but somewhere in there they have dementia, they have Alzheimer's, they have one of those types of neurological impairments for their brain, and it doesn't matter how long they live, right? It doesn't matter. They're not going to know. They can't do the job. They can't remember the stuff. So I guess from my perspective, to be fair, I don't see this logic that because people live longer, they shouldn't get disability benefits. I don't see that. Your body's still going to be worn out. All right. With that said, I will catch you all at the next video. Give me about 10, 15 minutes where we're going to go over who's getting furloughed, who's getting fired, who's getting let go from the Social Security Administration because the government is officially shut down. Attorney Walter Hnot, please remember, if you need a disability attorney, you call me during the 9 to 5 if you want. You don't have to choose me. You can choose anybody. With that said, also like and subscribe. Head over to Google, type in the law firm's name, Disability Resolution Florida. Throw some stars up there on the company page if you want. I love waking up and seeing those. Those always make me they brighten up the day. They make the day go better. Also, with that said, if you want a private session where we talk about your particular situation, right? You're going through a CDR, you're looking to stop working and going into disability benefits. What's the roll through period on the timeline look like? There's a contract below. It's a one pager where basically you can hire me for a 30-minute or a 1 hour period to just talk you through what you should be doing. Or if you have an overpayment or something like that, I can walk you through it if I can't do full representation. All right. With that said, I will catch you a little bit later. And then remember, we have 2 more videos. One's about who's getting terminated or furloughed from the SSA. And the other one is a debate about whether or not people with anxiety should be able to go ahead and have some form of personal protection as a result of their impairment, potentially creating some sort of not desirable outcome with that item of personal protection. We're going to debate it. I'll catch you a little bit later. I'll see you at the next video in about 10 to 15 minutes. You have a wonderful, wonderful night. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much. And the link for the next video will be in the chat. All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.